Hi, I'm Nathan Lawrence, and in this presentation what I want to do is just briefly introduce you to the flipped classroom and how we can engage students through online learning. So what is a flipped classroom? Well, essentially a flipped classroom is simply a learning strategy that reverses the classroom environment. What I mean by that is where in a traditional classroom, content is delivered during class time, a flipped classroom introduces students to content through podcasts, screencasts, or even video. What that then does is frees up class time to allow students to engage in activities that help to deepen and enrich the learning environment. So for what reasons did I make the change? Well, ultimately it has to do with the students. I want to increase student responsibility, and the flipped classroom model certainly does that. But there are other advantages as well. The flipped classroom model allows students to work at their own pace. In addition to that, it increases flexibility. Our students have busy schedules, and because they have access to the content of the course 24/7 online, it allows them to work on course content at a time that best suits them as a student. All students are different. We know that many students learn better in different ways. The flipped classroom model also allows students to use those learning strategies that best suit them as a student. What it also does is gives them an opportunity to engage with other students by using class time to work on homework, quizzes, and practice tests, assignments that generally would be done individually at home. Students now have an opportunity to work together on in class. But the advantages don't stop there. There are also advantages to the flipped model to you as a parent. So parent involvement. There are two things here I want to point out. First is transparency. As a parent, you have access 24/7 to the same content that your student does. All of the videos, homeworks, quizzes, and practice tests are available to you. In addition to that, because you have access to all of that content, it also allows you to see the alignment across the assignments and the assessments. I want to make sure that I am testing kids on things that I'm instructing on. And when parents have access to the content that's being instructed and also seeing the assessments that are being given, my hope is that as a parent, you'll see the alignment between the two. And then finally, the reason for making the change is college prep. What I'm going to look at here in a slide or two is the direction that colleges and universities are going with online education. But before I do that, the next slide here has to do with student success. For the last 3 years here, because I don't have data for 2019, we haven't finished that school year yet, but here on this slide, in 2015 and 2016, my class average for Algebra 2 was an 83%, which is a very decent average for an Algebra 2 class. It's a difficult course, and an 83% is a low B. I made several changes going into the 2016-2017 school year, changes that I thought for sure would be beneficial to the students, and they did help, but it didn't have the impact I thought. 2016-2017 school year, I only saw an average increase of 1 percentage point up to an 84%. Then last year, 2017-2018, was when I decided to make the change to the flipped classroom, and the change was dramatic. What I saw was a 92% average in my Algebra 2 courses. I did not change the class. It's still Algebra 2. All the content is the same. A large reason for the increase in the average was because of the way students interacted with the content in the course. Now, going back to what I talked about, the direction colleges and universities are going in. This slide talks a little bit about some research that was done by the University of the Potomac in Washington, D.C. The point I want to make here is the last bullet point. The rest of it's very good information, but the last bullet point says that 67% of college instructors believe videos, blogs, and podcasts, as well as other online media, are not just good resources to have, but are necessary teaching tools. That's really, really important. Then I have quality education, right? I've heard people say that there isn't any data to support the flipped classroom model, and that just isn't true. There is a lot of data out there. A number of studies have been done, and this slide just gives you a few statistics about those studies. 77% of educators believe that online learning is just as good, if not better. That's educators. What about students? Well, 70% of students also would agree that an online learning environment is just as good, if not better, than a traditional classroom. And the last two bullet points have to do with standardized test scores. What the study by the University of the Potomac in Washington, D.C. found was that the average score on standardized tests for learners in a traditional classroom was in the 50th percentile. But learners who took part in either an online classroom or a flipped classroom learning environment experienced a 59 percentile average score. Okay, we already talked about a number of the benefits to students of the flipped classroom model, but quickly to run through them again. First, being able to work at a self-pace, especially for students with documented learning disabilities. Being able to take more time on content that they find difficult and work more quickly through content that is either review or they find to be a little bit simpler. The flexibility is huge given how busy our student schedules are these days. Availability is another big one. When it comes to availability, the flipped classroom model is really well suited for students who miss class due to a sickness or illness, a family function, or some other circumstance that keeps them out of school. Because the content of the course is available to them 24/7, it allows them to either keep up with the class while they're away or greatly reduces the amount of time that it takes for those students to get caught up once they return to school. We talked about important life skills. It allows students to work much more in collaboration with each other when completing homework assignments, quizzes, and practice tests. We know two heads are better than one. And anytime our students get an opportunity to work together and develop those communication skills that are so vital for working in a group is always going to be beneficial. And then, of course, ownership. It is our students' education. It's their learning, and they should be taking responsibility for it. Now, some drawbacks. There are definitely some drawbacks to the flipped classroom model, but what I want you to understand is that I have thought through these drawbacks, and I believe I have come up with good ways to either minimize, if not eliminate, these drawbacks. First, accountability. By giving students quizzes and practice tests, I'm holding students accountable for the content. That way they can't wait until the last minute to do all of their work. This also goes hand in hand with procrastination. By putting due dates on those quizzes and practice tests, I'm making sure that students aren't waiting until the night before to cram for a test, but that they're having to keep up with a certain schedule, even though they can go at their own pace, so that they're not waiting until the last minute. And then finally, face-to-face time. Definitely a drawback to the flipped classroom model can be that we're encouraging students to spend more time in an independent study behind a screen, listening to a podcast, a screencast, or a video. But I believe that in my model, where we use class time to do things like homework, practice tests, and quizzes, as well as encouraging student collaboration, helps to increase the amount of face-to-face time that they get, not only with their peers, but also with me. The fact that I'm available to answer their questions and to help them when they get stuck. On this slide, what I give you is just some of the sources that I used for the information that I've given to you in this presentation. What I would do is encourage you to please do some of your own research. Using the keywords flipped classroom in Google, you can access more blog posts, websites, and articles than you could possibly read in a lifetime. Of course, I would encourage you to reach out to me if you ever have any questions, comments, or concerns. I'd be happy to meet with you or speak with you individually to answer your questions. Thank you for joining me.